Will Canada become the 51st state of the United States? Canada is extraordinarily unlikely to become the 51st state of the United States. Below is a detailed, balanced analysis of why this idea comes up, what would legally be required, the political, economic, cultural, and international barriers involved, and what is far more likely to happen instead. Where the idea comes from. The notion that Canada might one day become the 51st state of the United States appears regularly in jokes, opinion columns, internet debates, and political rhetoric. It resurfaces during moments of tension or contrast between the two countries, such as trade disputes, cultural disagreements, or periods when American and Canadian politics seem to be moving in different directions. Because Canada and the United States share the world's longest undefended border, deep economic integration, a common language for much of the population, and similar living standards, the idea can sound plausible on the surface. But plausibility fades quickly once we examine the legal realities, national identities, constitutional barriers, political incentives, and global consequences involved. Legal and constitutional barriers. What U.S. law would require. Under the U.S. Constitution, admitting a new state requires approval by Congress, both the House and the Senate, a signed act by the President. That process has historically applied to territories already under U.S. control, not to sovereign foreign countries. For Canada to join the U.S. as a state, or multiple states, the U.S. would likely need constitutional amendments, new federal laws redefining sovereignty, agreement on representation, senators, representatives, electoral college votes. These changes alone would be politically monumental. What Canadian law would require. Canada's constitutional hurdles are even higher. Canada is a constitutional monarchy with a written constitution, deeply entrenched federal, provincial powers, strong protections for minority language and cultural rights. To dissolve Canada as a sovereign state would require approval of the Canadian Parliament, consent from all provinces under the unanimity formula, negotiations with Indigenous nations, whose rights are constitutionally protected, a national referendum with overwhelming support. There is no realistic scenario in which these conditions would be met. Canadian public opinion and national identity. Canadian identity is stronger than it appears. Despite cultural similarities, Canadians generally see themselves as politically distinct, socially different, historically independent from the U.S. Key pillars of Canadian identity include universal healthcare, parliamentary democracy, official bilingualism, multiculturalism as state policy, a more restrained political culture. Surveys consistently show that an overwhelming majority of Canadians oppose joining the United States, even during times of frustration with their own government. The not American factor. Canadian identity is partly shaped by not being American. This doesn't imply hostility, but it does mean that independence matters deeply. Becoming a U.S. state would mean losing independent foreign policy, losing national symbols, flag, anthem, monarchy, subsuming Canadian institutions into American ones. For most Canadians, this would feel less like joining and more like disappearing. U.S. political incentives or lack thereof. The Senate problem. If Canada became a single state, it would gain U.S. senators, dozens of House seats, significant electoral college power. If it were divided into multiple states, that number would grow even larger. Either way, this would dramatically alter the U.S. political balance, which neither major party would support unless they were certain it would benefit them, and they couldn't be. Ideological uncertainty. Canadian political preferences do not map neatly onto U.S. party lines. For example, Canadians are more economically progressive on healthcare and welfare, more restrictive on guns, more supportive of environmental regulation, less religiously driven in politics. This makes Canadian voters politically unpredictable by U.S. standards, which discourages serious consideration of statehood. Economic integration without political integration. Already deeply integrated. Canada and the U.S. already enjoy one of the world's largest bilateral trading relationships, shared infrastructure and investment. Agreements like NAFTA, now USMCA, allow both countries to gain most economic benefits of integration without sacrificing sovereignty. What Canada would lose economically. As a U.S. state, Canada could lose control over its banking system, independent trade agreements, currency sovereignty, control over natural resources under Canadian law. These losses would outweigh potential gains for most Canadians. Healthcare and social policy differences. One of the biggest practical obstacles is healthcare. Canada's publicly funded healthcare system is a defining national institution, broadly popular across the political spectrum. Joining the U.S. would almost certainly mean replacing it with a market-based system or forcing massive restructuring of U.S. healthcare nationwide. Neither outcome is politically feasible. Other differences include gun regulation, criminal justice, education funding, social safety nets. Reconciling these systems would be enormously complex. Indigenous sovereignty and treaties. Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples is legally distinct from that of the United States. Treaties are constitutionally protected. Land claims are ongoing. Self-government agreements exist. Any attempt to dissolve Canada would require consent from Indigenous nations, renegotiation of treaties, international legal scrutiny. Ignoring this would violate both Canadian law and international norms. International law and global consequences. Canada is a recognized sovereign state. Canada is a member of the United Nations. A member of the United Nations. Part of NATO. A G7 country. A signatory to hundreds of international treaties. Absorbing Canada into another country would require renegotiating or terminating treaties, shift global power balances, raise serious concerns about precedent. Peaceful annexation of a major developed democracy would be historically unprecedented. Global reactions. Other countries would view such a move with suspicion, worrying about U.S. expansionism, destabilization of norms around sovereignty, power imbalances in international institutions. Even close allies would likely oppose it. Cultural differences that matter. While Canadians and Americans share pop culture, important differences remain. Political tone. Canadian politics is generally less polarized. Media ecosystem, less sensationalized. Civic norms, stronger trust in public institutions. Regional identities. Quebec alone presents a major barrier. Quebec's French language and civil law system would make integration into the U.S. especially complicated. Historical perspective. Attempts in the past. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, there were limited American hopes that Canada might join the U.S. These failed because Canadians resisted. Britain retained control. Distinct institutions developed. Since Confederation in 1867, Canada has moved steadily toward greater independence, not less. Modern trajectory. Over the last century, Canada has gained full constitutional independence, developed its own citizenship, strengthened national institutions. There is no historical trend pointing toward absorption by the U.S. What is likely instead? Rather than political union, the future will almost certainly involve continued close alliance, trade disputes and negotiations, cultural exchange, cooperation on defense and climate issues, occasional tension, followed by compromise. This model, independent but deeply connected neighbors, has worked remarkably well. Conclusion: a thought experiment, not a realistic outcome. Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States is best understood as a joke, a rhetorical device, a thought experiment, or a misunderstanding of how sovereignty works. The barriers are not just political. They are constitutional, cultural, legal, economic, and emotional. Both countries gain far more by remaining independent, allied, cooperative, respectful of each other's differences.